Disclaimer: the information and education material contained herein is meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of GAN's processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.
And thank you all for participating today. This is what makes our meeting so strong. We are the third in the series every week. The third dimension. And the first one being, of course, on Thursday, the Knowledge Seekers Workshops. And then Friday, the Brazilian community leads the way. And we just follow. And we have a very good leader with Mark Anderson. So thank you very much. And I want to thank all the panelists who are supporting us in all the other continents. And all the people who've continued to listen to these presentations and trying in so many ways to understand better what is going on. So let's get into it, because this is part of the Keshe American Knowledge Team meetings of 2025, and it's just a continuation. And so what we're trying to do here is bring more knowledge or more understanding of this knowledge. This is the Keshe Foundation, Spaceship Institute, Teachings on Plasma Science. We are in the basic nanotech series here. Today we're going to talk about portability. My name is Alexander. I am from Canada. It is May the 25th and 2025. This is the Keshe Foundation North America Plasma Education Series. So I hope you have fun today, because we're trying to condense all the teachings, thousands and thousands of hours, and even still we're getting into many, many hours. But what we're trying to do is to put it together in a way that the mature knowledge seekers can move ahead, but not so as to leave the new knowledge seekers behind. And so this is the challenge, because right now we have to hit a critical mass, and we are slightly below that. However, it is above a revolutionary stage. I think it only took about 3% to bring on the American Revolution. And now we're looking at a world revolution, and maybe we need a little bit of a higher percentage. We are there. We are ready to deliver. But the thing is that what we're looking for is for the practical application of this technology. And so being a space organization, we have to wonder, how is this information coming together for the average person on the street like you and me? And portability comes into the question here, because computer people will understand that portability is something that is able to take information from one system and put it into another. So in other words, to download information from a mainframe, say, to a personal computer, or to download information from the cloud to a laptop, or download information from maybe the creator. Yeah, there's the ticket. And some of us don't need any assistance in that, but we're talking about an extremely small percentage. So let's deal with the bigger situation at hand. And so what we're trying to do is to better understand the complex books of Marantava Kolikesh as he put together in book number 1 what is called the universal order of the creation of matters. Now, what I would like to comment on is that what is most gratifying, and we've all come through educational systems in varying degrees, but regardless, we always come to the end of our so-called formal education, and we have questions, many, many questions. And the answer to a lot of these questions is, I don't know. And we've kind of grown to accept that. So here we are with the universal order of creation. And you say, well, where did the matters come from? And the answer is from matter, dark matter, and antimatter. How concise is that? So then becomes a challenge to understand what these matters are. But in order to understand that, we have to understand the structure of light. And so this is a revelation for a lot of people because we didn't know that light had a structure. It was just something that came and went. And we saw a lot of it during the daytime, and we didn't have too much at night. And it tells us that the structure of light is traveling from one place to another. And as we see in the cover of book number 2, it's from one universal matter to another universal matter. And we're not exactly clear which matters we're talking about because in fact they're undifferentiated. And so that's a very technical term because we don't differentiate with what that matter is. It is non-specific. But the origin of the universe as described in book number 3 is very specific because that is our universe. And yet we don't know much about it because we're locked into our little tiny universe, unaware that we have a sister universe, and unaware, of course, that our universe and the sister universe were created from another point of origin. And then, of course, there's the rest of the universe. So scale comes into it. Scale comes into the discussion. So we are preoccupied with our little part of our little planet, and we like to subdivide it with all the nations. And of course, each of us has our own race, and this is why we call it a race, because it's competitive. But for 379 weeks, Rick Raman and the Universal Council, all of the Earth members were putting forward one planet, one nation, one race for justice and world peace, to understand that we are all part of the humanity race and that our planet is our home. And so our race, our home, is actually one nation. And so there really isn't any reason to have a competition on that basis. And it is kind of going against everything that we've been brought up socially, and whether it be in terms of business or relationships, whether it's friendship or marriage or social or career-wise or education or sports. There's always a competition. And so it's a lot of fun. But that entertainment, which is what it is not really bringing peace and prosperity to our planet. And this is something that when we always ask, how do we achieve that? And there's that time-tested traditional answer. I don't know. But there is a plasma rule, and that rule changes the game. So where the higher strength feeds the weaker strength, it goes in direct competition with the rule of the strongest, where the higher strength eats the weaker strength. And so this becomes a conflict point. But we have to understand that each conflict point, as it's implicated, doesn't mean war. It means a kind of energy field. And as such, there's always a potential for creating this conflict point into a binding zone. And we find that when we're talking about the universal order of creation of matter, then that becomes what we call an inertia density manifestation, where you take the two fields and you bring them together into an inertia field. And of course, because it is of a lower energy, it has more density. And because it is a product of our plasma state, then to manifest in physicality, it has to come down into lower density. So the implication, of course, is that this becomes a minimization. This becomes a kind of a defeat, something that, we have come down a peg or two. And so we see that all of us have this energy binding need. And since each of us have this need, it is a self-serving need. But what we've grown accustomed to is that drawing that energy binding from others. And if we do it at the expense of others who also have an energy binding, self-serving need, then we find that suddenly there is a deficiency. And if we look around at our planet and we find that, fortunately for us, the planet was here before we were, and there was no deficiency, at least as far as we were concerned, because we were capable of doing that energy binding in a self-serving manner. So something has gone wrong here. And one of those things, of course, is that we've been given this set of 10 commandments. And all my life, I personally have been wondering about these 10 commandments because uh, how come there's 10? Who chose the 10? And, there are many things that could be construed as commandments, but it seems that these 10 here are the most important. But then we find out that there's the completion of the missing commandments is another 14. Interestingly enough, brings a total of 24 commandments. And then number 11 here is very, very important because thou shalt not lie. And as we've always said, one of the best games on earth is poker. And it's basically a game of liars. And who is the best liar wins. And so when there is a winner, not only are there other losers, but in this case, it is highly destructive because the winner, it takes all, and the losers have nothing left. And so this is one way to fulfill our energy binding needs at the expense of not some, but all. And so for a lot of people, this becomes a career choice. And of course, we see the near-term effects, and maybe we are jealous, and maybe we want to be like them. So we find that maybe, if we accumulate more money or more wealth, then we become superior in some way without having to actually qualify how we achieved that wealth or supposed superiority. So it really doesn't matter. The means has no bearing on the end. And so if we violate all the commandments that we have here, then maybe we can achieve outstanding success in terms of our fame and fortune. And of course, because of the delay and consequences on this planet, it's not something that we're too concerned with, are we, on a daily basis? Or are we? Because what we see is that there's a regular degeneration of our health and vitality on this planet. And so now with the Keshe Foundation, we're not only able to gas up, but we're able to go for the gold and achieve the vitality enhancement that we need in both the emotional and the physical state. And so many are overcommitted to the physical state, and many are overcommitted to the emotional state. And so it becomes a competition to find which one is, the most effective. And we find that there's a crossover here between the two. But then there's the other one, which is the mental state, and then of course there's the spiritual state, and we've always, when we've asked these questions, the answer has always been I don't know. And again, that's never been acceptable, not in my book anyway. I had to accept it, but who is going to teach you? And so it isn't just as part of the Keshe Foundation that Mr. Keshe is the teacher. But if we understand the plasma science, then we find the plasma science is the teacher. And then what we wonder is, what is the plasma science and where does it come from? And so there are pathways, and one of these pathways is the transmutation highway. And so we find that that is the highest energy state. And with that energy state, we're able to take advantage of the merging of the carbon-16 and the carbon-8, which is very exotic as an isotope. And we find that those two fields come together. And so the coming together and the product we have is an inertia field. And yet, so when we look at the basic highways, we find that there's another intermediary one, which is the transition highway. We're bringing together the carbon-14 and the carbon-12. I'm sorry, carbon-14 and carbon-10, and then we have a carbon-24 total on the transition highway. So somehow on the physical highway, the lowest transmission highway that we know of, we only reference carbon-12. And how is that possible that everything else seems to have, like in the cover of book number 2, the coming and the going, coming from and going to, and we only have the one product? So there's a lot that's missing. And so we find that when we say, we want to see the light, where does the light come from? And why do we need the light? And so it seems to be that where the light comes from is on the other side of the darkness. Because what we see most of is the darkness. And we seem to accept that because as we see in the energy binding for self-serving purposes, there are a lot of short-term rewards. But if we understand that these are not equal in terms of strength, and when we talk about strength, we're talking about energy states. So our carbon inertia highway is very much tied to the physical matter state. But when we look at the other side of the equation, it is very much tied into the plasma state of the creator. And so we have to wonder which one is the stronger. But, well, we have to think that it's usually our physicality and everything is in reference to that. But what happens if we understand that there's more dynamic action than meets the eye? And so we find that with the cups of life didn't seem to be a big deal. We didn't call it the cups of the pandemic. That didn't seem to be a big deal, but it involved the nanocoating process of the monatomic science, and in such, it drew energy from our core space, translated through our inner space, and it gave us not only the emotional strength, but also the physical strength. And then if we understand that the emotional strength and the physical strength comes together to give us our humanity strength, if it is in balance, if it is of proper field strength, then we can maintain that vitality. So in addition to that, we have many ganses that we're able to manifest. And the most important ones were carbon and calcium and zinc and copper. And then there's water and amino acid. But all the elements in the periodic table of elements are part of our physiology. And of course, there's a lot of people who do anything to get the gold, and we can produce the gold GANs. But most importantly, we found where the cup of the soul exists. And this is one of the I don't know questions that is fundamentally resolved. And so as we zero in on that, we come to the revelation that we know that the emotional cup has a magnetical gravitational relationship and therefore a soul. And the physical cup has likewise a magnetical gravitational relationship and therefore a soul. And likewise, so does the cup of soul. And this becomes very important to understand that there is a magnetical gravitational there relationship there as well. And of course, this becomes the residence of the soul. So when these three come together, so what we're talking about, the cup of the soul, the cup of the emotion, and the cup of the physicality, and each of them have a magnetical gravitational relationship. And then that becomes the resting point for the soul to take in all of these fields. And so that point becomes a fundamental core strength. And from there, we can build. And we have created the cup of the universe, which is basically linked to that. And so we have the left and the right hemisphere of the brain, which is operating on a different kind of energy level, and it connects us to the universe. And so we see the same kind of interaction where we have the copper GANs, which is physical, and the zinc GANs, which is emotional, and then we have the carbon GANs, which is tied to the universe. And so these three come together, and we find that we're able to create our physicality. So that becomes the sum of the individual components, or 1 + 1 + 1 = 3. But the cup of the universe keeps feeding, so we still have the one. And this is kind of different if you look at how we exchange matter state. So you want to buy a car, and the person who is selling the car wants the money. So you have money, you give that money to the person with the car, and they give you the car. You have less money, but now you have a car. And the person who sold the car has more money, but less car. Well, the universe will tell you, if you exchange that money for the car, you will still have the money and you will have the car. And it will not only you, and not only at perhaps the expense of the person who's selling, but the person who's selling would also have the money and also have the benefit of the car. So not at the expense of the buyer. And this is kind of a different point of view, but it just shows how the universe is working because we are taking the combination forces together into account. And so there we see the gravitational manifestation. And of course, we have to understand that the grand central station of the Earth has many ganses. And each of these ganses is manifest into one of the elements on the periodic table of elements. So fortunately for us, we have a place to go and do our thing. And if it wasn't for the Earth having already previously done its thing, we would have no place to do that thing. Maybe. But all of us here are on Earth, and we're kind of scratching our heads and saying, well, where do we come from? And of course, always that answer is, I don't know. What are we doing here? I don't know. And what happens after we leave? And I don't know. And how do we get all these ganses? And how do we get all these minerals? Well, they're there, so we might as well dig them up, forgetting that the Earth had to create these minerals. And so we are in the era of Beyond Beijing, which happened on May the 10th of 2025, where we saw the manifestation of gold before our eyes. And that should not be unusual. We could say we don't know. Okay, well, that's fine. But fortunately for us, the Earth knows. So really the question is, how does the Earth know before we know? And of course, up until now, that answer has also been, I don't know. So we're kind of getting tired of those answers. But, what we understand about the density is that it implies a falling. And through that falling, we have an increased density, increased pressure, and of course, increased gravity. And so there is an equation where the angular momentum equals the moment of inertia times the angular, and that's all fine and dandy, assuming that everything is fixed. And in that process of understanding this angular density, one of the ways to summarize the whole thing is that we are the victims of fallen angels, and maybe we ourselves are fallen angels. And history is rife with fallen angels. And because we have fallen, well, too bad, so sad. But when we look at the plasma science, we find that things are changeable and there's a rate of change. And this rate of change can be incremental, except it's incremental in levels of magnitude, which means 10 times more. So each level of increase, so when we go from 1 to kilo, is 3 times 10. In other words, 10 times 10 times 10. So 10 to the power of 3. And mega is 6, and giga is 9, and tera is 12. But we can go in the other direction, make it smaller. And then, so we go down to milli, micro, nano, and that's what we're talking about, basic nanotech here, and understanding that there's picotech. And, have we achieved the outer limits? What we have done is we have emerged out of the box of the old science. And this is very gratifying as well, because instead of having to basically resign ourselves to the answers of I don't know, we are now starting to achieve answers of here are the possibilities, here's what we're seeing, and here is an explanation, and let's see how accurate that explanation is. And like all good theories, once it's been disproved, It's no longer a theory. It's science fiction. And as we can see with the plasma science, it's working. So we now understand the monatomic meaning, which is the creation of the magnetical gravitational force fields of what we call plasmatic matter. But that matter also comes together individually through patterns, which we call magravs. So the basic pattern of a magrav is the magnetical gravitational force fields. But if we have multiple magravs coming together, then we create something else. And last week we saw that it was nanostars. So we have a progression, and if we're discussing how the atomic understanding is manifest, we can liken that to the chains of man. So on the atomic level, atoms are chained together by density. But when we get into the monatomic level, they still cling together, but they're not chained. And so this is our breakout, where we go from being chained to being unchained, because at that point, not only do we have more capabilities, but these capabilities are many orders of magnitude of a higher energy state. So just to simply go from the atomic to the monatomic is 10 to the power of 9. And that's a big number. So we're starting to see that we are enlisting the powers of a higher power. And how high is that power? So if we understand what the nanotech really is a transition from what we call the monoatomic to the monomolecular. And so we've seen a transition where we go from nanocaps to nanotubes to nanostars. And these nanostars can become monostars, just like the monatomic nanotech. And so what happens on the next step? Can we go into the, shall we say, monomolecular stars, the monostars of stars? How far can we go? And so we're starting to see, despite the answer to that question being, I don't know, what we're starting to see is that we are now making some progress, because where the road was straightened, very narrow, very limited, simply by putting a bend in the road, we've been able to navigate into a higher energy field. And this becomes very important. So we've talked a lot about the surface to volume ratios because it's important to understand charges and direction of flow. And so the higher the surface to volume ratio, the higher the negative charge. So this is how we define the difference between the charges based on points and faces. So by putting a bend in the road, we created another point. And so we have also created another face. But we're out of balance here because we have 3 negative charges and 2 positive charges. So we now have the opportunity to create a new dimension where we introduce a third charge. And so it's balanced between 3 negatives and 3 positives. We also find that this is the fundamental balance between the hydrogen and the oxygen, where the hydrogen is negative and the oxygen is positive. So if we combine these nanocharges together from all these straight lines, then we find that we are able to create charges that can add together, or we can create charges that minus each other. And if the endpoints are always negative, then the question is, how can you bring all these negative charges together and change their polarity? So if we were to say bringing all these charges together increases their mass, and the higher the mass, the higher the positive charge. Well, there we go. Now we understand what a gradient is. So with a charge gradient, the flux lines run along the surface, and the gradients cut across flux lines, and it involves steepness. So the steeper it is, the greater the gradient. And since the higher energy flows towards the lower energy, then the rate of flow comes into question based on the steepness. Okay, well, so now we have a gradient flow. So, but there are two flows: the transition, which cuts across these flux lines, or the transmission, which goes along these flux lines. But those are not the only ones that we're involved with, because the famous Brazilian mathematician Dino Kraspedon, who was reflecting on our so-called mathematical residue, and he found that, made the point that God is a set of mutually perpendicular lines of force oscillating upon themselves. So that means you have these perpendicular lines, and they are creating something, but they're still there. And so if we look at the structure of a cube, where we see the coming together of the X, Y, and Z axis, and then we try and navigate along each axis, we find that we cannot cross over if we wanted to navigate on this particular structure. That is the limitation of the physicality. So we have to follow a path that's open. And so we have one path that is yellow, and one path that is orange, and one path that is red. And if we look at plasma positioning, we find that it's possible for this plasma to occupy the faces. So we have face centering plasma, and then, of course, a combination of these faces puts us into body centering. So these are different criteria for creating positioning. So if we get back to the travel, and if we take that cube and just reposition it slightly, we can see that we can create this hexagonal format. And this is a fundamental component of organic chemistry, if you will, or biology. A lot has to do with that hexagonal structure. And if we were to focus only on these three dimensions individually and remove the cube, we're left with just the pathways. And there's no reference point. There's no way to say, well, we know that there's a start and we know there's a finish, but it's, really kind of hard to say which way the energy goes. So we can say that it's undifferentiated. So yeah, we don't know which way it goes. There's that I don't know. But the factor is that it's undifferentiated. So the energy does flow. And if we put them together, we find that as we overlap these dimensions, they do have a start point and they do have an end point. But maybe the end point is the start point and the other end is the end point. So the possibility is there. But what if we flip everything around? What if we reverse the pathways? Well, we don't know what we're referencing, but with respect to the X, Y, and Z axis and the pathways, there's still a start point, there's still an end point. We just don't know which one is which. So despite the fact that we've reversed it, without a reference point, it doesn't carry any meaning. And so then if we take these paths and we have one that is reversed, through our understanding of the science of inertia, we find that there is something else that's going on. So if we go through this three-dimensional recombination, and we said, okay, well, there is one set of three-dimensional paths, and if we flip everything around, there's another set of three-dimensional paths. But if we combine these two, we find that we have a three-dimensional pathway where, regardless of which way these three dimensions are structured, there is no conflict. There's always a pathway. And then when we look at the recombination, whoa, the structure manifests again without the structure. How can the structure manifest without a structure? All we did was we combined the paths and the pathways and the energy traveling along these pathways. So therefore, we have a recombination of three dimensions on one side and a recombination of three dimensions on the other side, and the coming together of what we call an inertia product field, and it implies a structure, but it has not manifested into the physicality yet. And so if we were just to take that plasmatic structure, and we can suggest that it's a hexagonal crystal or it's a cubic crystal, and so the pathways indicate that there's a crystalline connectivity. And if we were to stretch it along the x-axis, it would maintain that connectivity. If we were to stretch it along the y-axis, it would still maintain that. So there's an immediate implication of a crystalline stability. So regardless of the axis. And then if we introduce the z-axis, which could be, everywhere, but it basically takes into account the three dimensions of the crystalline stability. So what we find is that we have a three-dimensional portability where we can go through different energy states and energy stage transitions. So if we're in the solid, that is very crystalline. But if it's in liquid, then, it can kind of wave around and it's kind of flexible. But if it's gaseous, well, it's all over the place. And then if it's plasma state, well, where is it? And so the thing is that the rules for the plasma state has a three-dimensional portability through all of these energy state transitions from solid to liquid to gaseous to plasma state. And so that connectivity and that stability is inherent. But will it manifest into physicality? And will it manifest into that particular physicality that it came from? So in other words, the connectivity is portable, but the manifestation of the physical state is not determined. It is undifferentiated. So the stability is inherent in the energy state. We know that there's a stability in the physical state. So what we're saying is that there's a three-dimensional stability in the energy state. And what we're saying is that there is a portability of the connectivity and the stability from the physical state to the energy state. In the energy state, however, it is undifferentiated. So it does not necessarily follow that it would remanifest back into the original physical state. Because you see, the original physical state is a manifestation, inertia product of plasma state fields in the first place. So how did that connectivity manifest? So we found that when we did the nanocoating of the copper wire, we created a carbon nanocrystal. And then we basically combed all the charges together so that they were all working together. You know, when you're rowing a boat, if they all row together, the boat goes faster. So that is done on a monatomic alignment. And we see that we can facilitate a gradient charge. And so when we're talking about that gradient, we're referencing a negative positive junction. And we can see that we can also create a perpendicular momentum. This represents a mass in motion. And we can see this motion reflected in the waves that are emitted out of the surface of the sun. And then we can see multiple waves in such that they are stacked. So the question then becomes, is if the perpendicular momentum is part of the portability of the energy that is emitted as a perpendicular momentum, it would affect the NP junction on, say, the first circular field, but then it would also affect the second circular field. So that energy is portable, but that energy is not the same. So we see that it is wider at the top than it is at the bottom. And so the whole energy is now operating as a rotating field containment. And that containment is part of the intensity and the outtensity of the rotating field. There is no physical constraint. So we basically created an emission tube where the outside is the magnetical rotating field, and at the core is the gravitational rotating field. So if we take this hexagonal format and reposition it, kind of put it on its side, we're still maintaining the X, Y, and Z axis, and we're still maintaining the connectivity and that stability. But if we apply it in the manifestation of physicality, and we see that at the core, we create this hexagonal format. And if we have one, well, maybe there's another. Oh, well, yes, there is. And we could create another hexagonal format. So there's a relationship between the inner hexagonal format and the outer hexagonal format. So then we start to understand that maybe, since we've seen the pictures of Saturn's pole, and it is a large hexagonal pole, maybe we understand how the planet seems to be circular and the rings seem to be circular, but the pole seems to be hexagonal. And the question then is, how do we transition from this hexagonal, shall we say, crystalline connectivity into this circular stability? And so if we introduce this circular stability in this particular diagram and we link it all together, we find that there is a relationship between the hexagonal format in the core and these pseudo-circular fields that surround it, which actually surround it in a circular fashion. Isn't that interesting? And this is exactly the physical manifestation of a daisy. And if we look closely, we can see the hexagonal formations in the yellow core and the pseudocircular formations in the petals. And then we see how these daisies multiply and they look like a whole bunch of nanocaps. And yet we know within that nanocap is a structure, is a crystalline connectivity and a crystalline stability. And as the plant grows, so we find that it is creating different positions. And it does that by creating these gaps and these nano gaps. Wherever there's a nano cap, there's also a nano gap, and there's millions of nano caps, so there's millions of gaps. And as such, when they come together, each one being a magnetical gravitational representation of a field force, and when more of them come together, they create millions of dynamic plasma reactors. So the combination of the caps and the gaps are part of the plasmatic reactors. And we see that there is a connectivity. Whether there is a crystalline connectivity in the physical state or a crystalline connectivity in the plasmatic state, but there is a crystalline stability in this particular case because we have a stable maggrav system. So this is fundamental point in dimension building. So where we add one, we add a second one, connect one, add a third one, connect two, add a fourth one, and connect three. And we end up in a star formation. And this is exactly what happens with the nanostate, with the monatomic particles on a copper substrate. And so they create this lattice configuration, but there are thousands, tens of thousands of monatomic layers. And each of these layers, as we see by the blue layers sitting on top of the black layer, they nest kind of nicely together and they create these star formations, but they also create these patterns in the core, which are six-sided and have 6 points. And so we see that the graphene has this kind of gravitational connection as well, where we have the 3 negative charges added together. So the connector then becomes negative, but the nanostructure creates a low pressure opening. So by putting the layers on, we create these star formations that fill these pressure points in these openings. And of course, there's an up and a down. And how do we know which way is up and which way is down? How do we know? Because we can reverse it. So we can have a diamond structure. And so they don't align as a nanotube, but they align as a diamond structure that closes these tubes. So we have a nanolayer stacking system. And in the nano coating, we can do 30 to 40,000, but not only, and that can continue. And that can maintain its crystalline structure, its connectivity, its stability. And so we find that the graphene has these added capabilities, but we find that the nanostate has a monatomic energy flow. And we see that as what we call synergy, where 1 + 1 + 1 is more than 3. And so we have to go into the three-dimensional nanosphere state. And the thing about it is that it creates multiple monatomic energy flow. And so we have it as a superconductor at room temperature. But the difference between the organic structure and the polymer structure is that more than 3 in a chain is a polymer. So if we have 3 in an organic structure, it has to fold over and it creates a star formation of the star formations. In other words, it becomes a nanostar straight, and it could go up or it could go down. There is no differentiation from this with respect to direction of flow because we don't have a reference point. So when we look at this nanosphere state and we say, if it's a chain, then it's not living matter. But it would still have a magnetical gravitational relationship and it would still have a soul. Because without those components, it would not exist. So it becomes a conductor, a superconductor at room temperature. Our amino acid is structured the same way, except for a small big deal. It's not all carbon. Now we have oxygen, hydrogen, and nitrogen. And so when we look at how this superconductor at room temperature is made, we find that our essential fatty acids are also amino nanostars. And they're created the same way, but they do have a direction of flow, and they do have a structure, and they do have a connectivity. But they are not differentiated as of yet, because again, there's no reference. So we know that there is a flow, we know there's a connectivity, we know there's a stability, but there's no reference. And so to differentiate between a polymer and a protein, we see that 3 amino acids are the foundation, and the 4th amino acid causes a folding over to make the protein. When you create one, then you create the other, and that other is a byproduct, which we call H2O, water. And why do we know that? Well, because oil and water don't mix. Why don't they mix? Because they split up into protein and water. That's what causes the separation. So that separation is reflected in the star formation, what we call the magnetical gravitational. So that also implies a separation. So if we look at the structure of the star formation and we find that the higher mass, the oxygen, nitrogen, and carbon is of a higher mass, it's in the gravitational field state. And the hydrogen is in the magnetical field state. So now we have a direction of flow with respect to the star formation. And since we understand that the universal order of creation is bringing together all of these matters, the matter, dark matter, and the antimatter, so that each star formation is a star formation product. It's a star formation product, which we call inertia field, with the coming together of the matter, dark matter, and the antimatter. And as such, it creates a connectivity which gives us a gravitational stability. In order to have the gravitational stability, automatically there's a separation to a magnetical stability. So this is what we're seeing when we're looking at the rotating balls, because these rotating balls, although they're driven by a motor, they have GANs inside, which creates a field strength. And that field strength is a plasma field. And the fact that they are put together in a star formation, as we see here with the exhibit in Beijing a couple of weeks ago, these rotating balls are also in a star formation. And as such, a funny thing happens. We create a dynamic reactor. In other words, all of the plasma fields that were created, they maintain their connectivity, they maintain their stability, but they also create an inertia field product in the core. And at that point, then the question is, how do we differentiate what it is? And so we find that because there's some dynamic reactors that don't create anything. And that is the opposite, isn't it? When you create something, you also create something else. So if we're drawing all the energy, if you will, to create the gold, then all the other energy is in the shielding. And so that's how you have the interaction with the dynamic star reactors. There is a stability and there's a separation of force fields. And these are all dynamic reactions. So when we look at the dynamic plasma alone, we remove the structure and we look at the plasma field flow and we find that there's a gravitational force field in the center, which is highly positive. So all the energy that goes around is magnetical. But as we can clearly see, there are many paths. There's not just one path. And so we don't know what this is because there's no reference to what it is. However, we can see clearly that there is a connectivity and that there is a stability, but there is no manifestation. This is part of the plasma reality. So when we're looking at the dynamic plasma, it is all part of the matter state. So the dynamism of the plasma state and the plasma state interacting with the GAN state facilitates the matter state. All of this is in matter state. And everything, whether it's in physicality or whether it's in a plasma state, has a separation between the magnetical and the gravitational fields, which are opposite charges, but we don't have a clue as to which direction is going because there's no reference. So within its own structure, we have a magnetical gravitational field, but it's undifferentiated. So if we understand the star core component, it's magnetical gravitational. And then if we understand that there's a backside to it, opposite. So where we have a magnetical gravitational relationship, we also have a gravitational magnetical relationship. And so this becomes an inertia field. And in that process, as they bind together, they create this gravitational stability. That is the soul of the inertia. So where we have the energy converging or the energy diverging, depending on the direction of flow, we have the star formation inertia is the conversion due to its gravitational stability. So through this entire process, it maintains its connectivity and it maintains its stability. And if we look at the same principle of charge relationship with curves, we can find that we can create a gravitational stability on the inside of the curve and a magnetical stability on the outside of the curve. So now we understand how the surface energy is interacting on the surface of the Earth. So that's why we stand on the ground and we walk through the air. And there's that intermediate step where we can swim in the water. But there's another step that is above, and that would be the plasma science. And when we go to sleep at night, we can traverse the universe because we have the connectivity, we have the stability, and we have the portability. Isn't that nice? So we have relegated ourselves to being the four-wheelers of creation, where we have just, because we didn't want to understand, or we always were satisfied with the answer of I don't know, this inertia bonding is something that we always fudged. So trying to rationalize the difference between natural decay and natural creation, and to understand that it's all creation. So the combination on the one side is creation, and on the other side is decay, is also part of the creation. And there's a bonding factor that is part of it. And just because we can't see it, we can't see the connectivity. It remains, whether it's in the physical state or in the plasma state, because that energy is portable. So we find that there's a matrix bonding energies, and then there's a field flow. And so opposites attract. So not only are we having vertically gravitational to magnetical and then magnetical to gravitational, with the bond being gravitational, but the opposite is true. And then if we go across, we find that the covalent bond also has a gravitational and magnetical separation. So we allow the star matrix to have a bonding in that direction as well. So then the creation of this three-dimensional bonding platform is part of the nuclear feeding inertia. So each and every one of them is a fragment of the complexity. And so that complexity leads to gravitational stability. And once we have this gravitational stability, then we can talk about dimensional portability. Because all are part of the whole. In other words, 1 + 1 + 1 is greater than 3, and there is a continuity and a connectivity. So, and the portability. So the portability is really undifferentiated in its simplicity. And we know this is true because we don't have a memory beyond a certain age. Let's say in my case, younger than 3. But after the age of 3, I have a differentiated complexity. And that complexity is more stable. And so that stability leads to portability. So the gradient of stability is a charge, where one basis leads to the next. Just like you have a copper wire, that becomes your point of stability, and then we nanocode that, and we have increased the gradient of stability, and that's a superconductor. And radiation itself, then, as nuclear radiation expands beyond the containment, but does it have to do that? Because we are made of radiation. That is what sets us apart. And so the plasma is a containment of this radiation. So we could say that the radiation portability has a connectivity, and it is affected by the transmutation of radiation being the plasmatic transport system of energy portability. So you know that energy is portable because you can leave your home and go to work and come back. That's the epitome of portability. Or you can get in a car and drive to the grocery store and drive back. And there you are, more portability. You could go to sleep and you wake up in the morning and you're still there. Where were you? So you went through a transmutation of a plasmatic transport system of energy portability. And where did you go? Well, you have no reference point. But where did you come back to? That reference point was Earth. So that connectivity has to have a reference point in order to manifest in physicality. So then the question comes into this RNA portability, you see, because in my case, I don't remember before I was 3 years old. But I do remember my mother telling me that she taught me a lesson, and I learned that lesson. How can I learn that lesson? I don't remember being taught. I don't remember learning that lesson. So what it means is that the portability of energy can be patterned. And so if I don't remember that lesson before the age of 3, what happens before I was born? So where did they get this energy? And how was it ported? So the portability depends on the gradient. The RNA creates the pattern. The RNA facilitates the portability. And then, as we grow, we change the gradient. And so there is a connectivity and there is a stability. And I remembered my lesson. I don't remember learning the lesson. But the energy transition was ported. And so we see that the hydrogen dependency is universal. And so hydrogen is not just hydrogen. We see that the hydrogen molecules have covalent bonds, but we can reverse the polarity because in here we are not differentiated which direction we're going, but what we are doing is we're setting the stage where one is orthohydrogen, the other is parahydrogen. And so that has to do with whether or not each side has similar poles or opposite poles. So it all has to do with the negative positive junction, where you have the transition matter of one side, the three dimensions of the X, Y, and Z axis, and one side being negative, and the three dimensions of the other side, the X, Y, and Z axis, but they're now positive. And when you bring these two transitions together through the NP junction, now you have this transfer state, which is the inertia field of the NP junction, the negative positive junction. But it's undifferentiated. So what we see with the conservation of inertia is that the MAGRAV energy transfer state, whether it is GANS or NANO or atomic state, is in balance on each state level. However, we can go in between states. And this is how the nanocapsules are working. They create nano connections. They create nanostars. And then we have the stars of the stars. And then we carry on. And I'm sure you can see the difference of the MAGRAV pathways, where the attraction is gravitational, is based on the feedback intensity. And the repulsion is magnetical, and that's the out tensity, but it's also part of the feeding. So I'm sure you can see the difference. Can you see the difference? So in the beginning, we have the question. We have the neutron. It came from the light. It came before the atom and before the PM tick, because the creation of the atom created the PM tick. The PM tick being the principal matter, because it's magnetical, it's an energy pack, and it comes together when we talked about the universal creation of matter, the antimatter, dark matter, and the plasmagen matter coming together in a conversion to create this gravitational MAGRAV, which is undifferentiated until it comes in contact with the Earth's MAGRAV. And now you have a field interaction, which we call this inertia product. And it is differentiated because it's on Earth. And we know what it is, because when we look at the plasma, we don't know what it is. It's undifferentiated. And when it comes together, it manifests into an inertia field, which is a combination of the magnetical and gravitational fields. So now we have a convergence. But if we take that field and bring it together with another field, such as we have a rotating hemisphere in the north and a rotating hemisphere in the south, and we bring it together, we have one planet which is rotating in one direction. And that is our home. And so whether you're in the northern hemisphere or in the southern hemisphere, your feet are on the ground. So when we talk about this principal matter and how it comes, it is undifferentiated. However, the density remains, regardless of what the density attraction is. So the undifferentiated plasma has a portability. It can go to any density. So all of these densities are part of the containment. How do we decide? How do we differentiate? So that is where we have to understand the difference in the matter plasma dimensions. Some are physical, they would be more dense, more gravitational, and some are plasmatic, they would be magnetical. However, they're all part of the matter plasma dimensions. And so for our reference point, we are matter plasma feedback dominant. We see it from our manifestation point of view. We don't see it from the creation point of view. And that is a huge disadvantage. So if we were understanding that there's a gravitational conformation of the gravitational tracking of hydrogen, because it gives us a fingerprint, we know what it is. So there was a pattern, there was a creation, but how did the water come together? How did the hydrogen become water? And so there had to be another surface tension created. And when we look at the nature of the water being H2O, how can two tiny hydrogens come together with the big fat oxygen and create this water, and it be a magrav that is round and gravitationally stable and maintains this connectivity? And so we find that the oxygen has the same rules. It is gravitationally stable and it has a fingerprint, a unique fingerprint. So it maintains this connectivity. It is because of this stability that it can combine with hydrogen, but it can combine with anything else. So we find that this is just a display of multiple layers of a captured field, which is undifferentiated, and it is a go-between of energy and motion. And so if we have multiple densities and multiple spheres, and we have multiple layers of overlapping fields, we can capture these energies. But in order to capture them, we have to also release them to keep it going, because energy is always in motion and we can't stop it. And so here we have an opportunity to differentiate it based on density. And that's all we have, because we have no reference point unless we correctly assume that it has to do with Earth space. But what about the rest of the universe, which is not Earth space? What happens then? So this is our challenge. We have, maybe we could summarize as obstacles. So how do we deal with obstacles? So there are starters. These are pathway seekers. But there are stoppers as well. These are pathway blockers. It is because of the separation of the starters and the stoppers that we have a range and we have a balance. But then we have connivers. These are pathway avoiders. In other words, they live in a contrived environment. They're offset by facilitators who create linkages of pathways. And that pathway, in terms of its stability, is always linked to the creators. So the facilitators are creators linked to the creator. And so when we look at these reactors, some give us shielding and some give us gold. And whichever way you look at it, we're number one. So what we're looking at is the humanity inertia shielding that shields us from the hostiles and from aggression, from environmental harm, and more importantly, from fear-mongering. Because that becomes the biggest stopper. So when we look at the universal cup and we see the relationship between the dynamic transfer state and the physical destination state, and if we see that physicality, and that is our structure, and understand that, well, if we take that structure away, we are left with a universal portability where the connectivity remains, the stability remains, and the energy portability remains. So then the question becomes, what is the reference point? And so in our immediate desire, it has to do with our Earth space. But if we look at the rest of the universe, which is not Earth space, then what we really have to work on is the soul food and tune into that and receive it by turning on the energy and dropping out of our resistance. So we can provide that pattern so that we can get that energy and then we can receive. And this is what we need to do with the plasma science, bring together the research teams. Now we have a pathway. We are beyond the May the 10th of 2025 era, where we can now produce gold, but we can produce any element, because what we've done is we've learned how the creator is doing it. And since we're part of that team, it's about time we learned how to do this. So that connectivity is there. That inherent knowledge is there. That is part of our RNA portability. And so that becomes part of the transmutation, what we call the range transition, which transcends the inertia field transmutation dimensions. So the laws of conservation govern the covalent, trivalent, and tetravalent bonding attributes. So the containment of inertia is manifest through the containment and contention of equality. It's not a competition, because the soul of man cannot be abandoned nor compromised. So the color of man is based on the integration with the soul of the man, and that is the integrity of man. That becomes the biggest connection to our augmented reality, which includes the flux and the flow towards, to, into, within, through, out of, and from every charge, every form, all mass, matter, or substance. So we can intensify and extensify what we are. We need to be connected. That connection supports the flux of continuous change, and that connection is hooked on life. So for 591 weeks in a row through the Knowledge Seekers Workshop, we have suddenly brought across this, transcending the limitations of nuclear science and bringing us together to the understanding of the greater oneness. So we have on the verge of technology release, and it's overdue because it's hard to sleep when our beds are burning. We need a scientific rescue, a financial rescue, a political rescue, a preservation rescue. This month we have a chance to fly with a captain, demonstrating our trust in the universe. if you can't trust your soul, you can't trust anyone. So when we look at the dimensions, we are none of the three dimensions. We're in another dimension. Is that the fourth dimension? Well, I don't know. What's the reference? Are we coming or are we going? And since it's a two-way street, how do we know? Are we creating the matter and then creating the universe? Or is the universe creating the matter? And since the structure of the light goes both ways, it's about time that we understand the plasma rules. Because the plasma rules dictate peace. And there are many points on the field strength of the dove. This is Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute teachings on plasma science, welcoming all the beautiful knowledge seekers learning about the new selection process of the new plasma science. So, yeah, we use the World Peace Treaty because that's the ticket. We have to sign it, we have to choose it, and we have to live it. The true nanotech maintains the integrity of the new dawn. Is the peace dome of outer space an umbrella or a fountain? And who decides that? Or is the inertia of the present governed by dimensions of history? And who decides that? And is it time to learn the encapsulation of self in a universal context? Well, the self has to decide that. And the inertia of self can migrate as a superconductor. And this energy portability is in the neutron handbag of the new physical transmission dimension. So the plasma science has to be delivered daily via the peace dome in a practical exchange for peace on Earth. So welcome to the new golden outer space age. I hope you enjoyed this lesson. This is the end for today. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Alex. Again, a very deep teaching. I can't believe you've understood all of this so thoroughly. It's just amazing. It's like you've already created your own time machine in a way. But let's see if the participants have any curiosity about what you've been discussing and sharing with us. Thank you again. Anyone would like to ask a question about what Alex just covered? I've been wondering about the solid field that he talks about. You just said energy is always in motion. So I guess the solid field that he created without any material, he said this is shielding. Is that solid field always in motion? I would think so, but I'm trying to understand a solid field as opposed to a dynamic field. Anyone want to
This is a problem.
share your understanding about that?
Yeah, no, this is a problem because we are so physical. So, we understand pain and we understand banging our heads against the wall. And we have to understand that the pain will go away when we stop banging our heads against the wall. So that's not a joke, that's a reality. So why can't we not go with the flow? Because we don't see the flow. We have to envision this flow and understand that this flow creates a separation of the magnetico-gravitational field forces. And once you have that, now you have a maggrav. And so the manifestation of that maggrav then becomes portable through all the different dimensions and all through the different energy field states. And if we were just to talk about the four basic ones, solid, liquid, gas, and plasma state. So the plasma is literally encompasses all of those states. It's just like saying you drive a car. It doesn't tell you what the brand is. It's undifferentiated. It doesn't even tell you what color of car. Frankly, it doesn't even tell you how many wheels your car has. So, it's like the lady who was trying to gas up our electric vehicle. You have to know, what you're doing. And in order to do that, we have to increase our knowledge, but we don't have to be so scientific about it because each of us has our own different capability. But when we look at, say, bodybuilders, they're overcommitted to their physicality. When you look at, shall we say, uh, beautiful women, they would be overcommitted to their emotional state. When we look at scientists and professors, they might be overcommitted to their mental state. Or we look at gurus and things like that. Well, they might be overcommitted to their so-called spiritual state. But these are all individual, non-differentiated, singularity-based states. So we have all those capabilities. So why are we choosing one as opposed to the other? And what is the motivation for that? So if it becomes a competition and say, well, I see that one is, more physical. As an athlete, they make more money. Or I see that person's more beautiful. Well, they make more money. So then you say, well, maybe I'm not so physical, but well, maybe you're not so beautiful either. So understanding that beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. And then we have other capabilities, and then we find that we're all really equal. So each of us has a skill and a preference, but each of us has a common denominator, and that is the freedom and emancipation of humanity on this planet. So this is the new golden outer space age, and we need to understand that. Back to you, Mark.
Okay, I think that shielding was created in the center reactor, right? Which he referred to as the sun.
Yes.
Again, he said it was highly gravitational, but it didn't create any materials, but at the same time, it provided a shielding. It seems like the knowledge is quite deep to set this whole process up in the right way to show the demonstration of the technology. This is not something you pick up or it doesn't fall out of the sky, let's say.
Well, here's the anomaly. Okay. The PM tick has a gravitational stability in order to keep its structure. The Earth has a gravitational stability in order to keep its structure. So in the process of creation, not only the Earth, but we are creating PM ticks all the time. It's almost a frenzy. And at the same time, PM ticks are drawn to us all the time. And it's a cornucopia of energy. So we don't have to do anything about it other than understand how it works, understand that it's there, understand it is part of our structure, and understand that we need to act as facilitators, not as connivers, because the universe provides unconditionally. So why are we imposing our man-made rules on the foolproof method of creation? Each of us has to make that choice now, and each of us is capable of doing that. And the pathway is through peace and prosperity. The two are not mutually exclusive. In fact, they are dovetailed together to create peace on earth. That's what we need to do. So if we don't have peace on earth, forget about the rest of the universe. Back to you, Mark.
Okay, again, I don't know if you've addressed this solid field or not, but that's fine. I've really never heard much about this before. But you kept saying, did you say something about you don't want to hear I don't know? Or we say I don't know a lot. I know I say I don't know a lot because I don't feel I've gotten an in-depth understanding. So what is better, to say I don't know, to explain it the way conventional science explains things, or what would be the
Oh, wait
third
a
option,
second.
to explain it but not really understanding it?
Well, no, excuse me. The people who are in the know always say, I don't know. So is it they don't know, or they don't want to know, or they don't want to tell you? And, this is something that is confounding because, let's face it, we were told when we entered school, going back to, kindergarten, the reason we go to school is to gain knowledge. And if, as the policeman asked me, why didn't you knock on that door? And I said, because I'm looking for help. So he just assumed that I would knock on any door looking for help. Well, no, I'm knocking on doors that I know could possibly help. I didn't know which one, but I knew it wasn't that door. So if you're going to school for knowledge, then, you're expecting to receive that. That's why they call it a school. However, at the end of that school, and you come away with, well, thanks for your question, but the answer is we don't know. So you say, well, okay, this is the wrong school. Okay, so I need to go to another school. It's the same thing when I asked the doctor, so what caused my illness? And they said, I don't know. Well, then I said, well, I can get the same answer from the baker, but at least he might give me a muffin. So, I get nothing. I get nothing from him. Just, oh, we don't know. But, if you don't know, then stand aside. Bring someone in who does know. Who does know? Well, we don't know. So that's two I don't knows. And I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. So all of a sudden, the answer is the creator became stupid because up until a certain age, I was healthy. And then after that age, I was unhealthy. So God kind of forgot how to keep me healthy. So I could say, well, it's God's fault. Well, actually, it was my fault because when I was healthy, obviously I was following God's rules, and I became unhealthy when I started to deviate from following those rules. And so, where did I learn those rules from? Obviously, these were man-made rules. Funny thing happened I was talking to someone and it really stressed me out because we have this tremendous attention to what we eat, which is kind of a good thing, right? Because we all have a tendency to eat, shall we say, poor quality food. But what he said was that I can bring together the kind of nutrition that I need in that food that I'm eating. And I thought that very strange. So, in other words, you could eat very nutritious food or less than nutritious food and still get the proper nutrition from that. And the reason for that is because food on its own is undifferentiated, but it has a construct, it has a connectivity, it has a portability of energy. That's why we eat the food. So if that energy is coming to you based on the food that you eat, how much is coming to you? Can you change that? And isn't it contrary to what you've been brought up to? And I'm assuming a lot here because you're a North American, brought up the way I am, and we want more. And that's what my wife used to say, how do you like that? Oh, this tastes like more, which means it tastes good. So they would want more, which is great. I really appreciate that they appreciate the quality of the taste of the food. But what we find with the plasma science is that we can affect the gradient of the energy that we draw from the food by eating less. Well, I'm still having trouble with that one. But I have been working on it for the last 2 years, and I have finally managed to begin reducing my weight. So the old dog is learning some new tricks. Back
We
to
all
you.
are. We all are. But if you and I, Alex, as a team, were tasked to set up these reactors in a similar way and produce any material, it doesn't have to be gold, let's just say any sort of material, how would you approach that? Would you say, I don't know? Would you sort of bluff it and put this in there and that in there and spin this and tilt this at this angle and go through it? How would we approach that?
I built a reactor out of GANs with no motors and just GANs and water. And within each container, I created a rotating field. And I didn't use a swizzle stick, and I didn't use a centrifuge.
Mm-hmm.
It just created it on its own. And during the duration of the creation of that rotating field, I noticed how I was able to impart the energy into water that became more alkaline. And I was not doing that with chemicals or with electrolysis. So was I a magician, or, did I discover something? Basically, I just set up the pattern. And because of that structure, it was very close to what was required. And I managed to increase the pH of the water from 6 to 8. And I managed to do that over a period of time, reducing it from 31 hours to less than 12 hours. Which meant that the field strength was increasing. But I didn't do anything in terms of when we say doing, with my hands or with a tool, with a sledgehammer, with a drill. I didn't do anything there. I didn't have any rotating wheels. And I've been doing that since 2017. So now what do you want me to say? I think the plasma science is a hokum. Really? Then explain the rotating field. And now science would say is, I don't know. But and I know, and all the people on this panel know. It's the fundamental part of plasma science, the balance of the magnetico-gravitational force fields. Thank you very much. Back to you, Mark.
And that was a very nice story. And of course, I'll show the alkalizer and energizer picture that is available to you in the Keshe Foundation store, and we'll show also the fan with the plasma wind and the star formation. But interesting, you were able to achieve that.
And you know what else is interesting is that despite all the disbelief and the, outrage, if you will, I'll never forget this one cab driver came and he says, I want to get some plasma water from you. And I said, well, I don't even know you. How do I know you? Oh, you don't know me. I just drive cab. Oh, so why do you want this water? Well, he says, I don't know. It's just a lady paid me to come here to get it. I don't even know who it is. But I said, like, what's the problem with the lady? And he says, oh, she's not well. So what can I tell you? It's like it's like Mr. Keshe's girlfriend, right? Pushes you away with her hands and pulls you with her feet.
I think those are the Iranian women he was referring to.
Oh, you think it's just Iranian women?
Let's see thank you, Alex. Let's see if any of the participants want to raise a question or have you restate something or recover one of the panels that you were showing. Anyone? Join the conversation. Do we think, I know Mr. Keshe said mankind was ready, but he's often said mankind is not ready. Are we at that point to see if mankind is ready for the change, whether they'll pick up on it or will it be delayed? So I think we're sort of in this position. We'll have to see how it goes. As Mr. Keshe said, I've done my part. Now it's up to the knowledge seekers to share what was done. And of course, we'll have more opportunities in Paris or Berlin, Washington, Tokyo, perhaps Moscow, and many other places. But I think he's put the ball in our court in a way. Of course, he's still working very strongly in the background to complete this whole process.
I got a contract once from a company. They were going to spend a lot of money on some repair work on one of their buildings. And I met them at an engineering conference, and everybody there was putting forward a solution. And of course, it was certified. It was certified according to, construction methods and stuff like that. But the one thing they all had in common was a durability of maybe 6 months. And I asked my customer, I said, are you prepared to spend that much money for a security for 6 months on your property, which I'm thinking you want it to last more than 6 months. I mean, that's one of the reasons people build buildings, they want them to last for quite a few years. And he says, well, I'm really not happy about that, but I don't have a choice. Well, I said, yeah, you do have a choice. And I offered him the choice. And I said, he says, well, I don't know if what you're doing works. Well, I said, you have a 100% security, confidence that what these other people are offering is not going to last more than 6 months. So that is assured. So it's not up to me to prove, it's for them to prove that they can do better than 6 months. So I got the job on that basis. At the end of the job, they saved more money doing it my way than the money that I made, if you believe that. And that was a shocker to me because I was a novice. I was, new to the industry in that regard, and I went against some pretty heavy hitters. And this is the thing. They say, well, you didn't do it the traditional way. Well, the traditional way is a time-honored way to prevent you from doing things better. So when you want to have the stability and the confidence, then you have to look at the track record. And if that track record is unacceptable, then you have to look for other things. And that's the problem that we have on this world today. What we're doing in terms of bringing peace to this planet is clearly not working. So there's the proof. There's all the proof that you need. So we are providing an alternative. And failing to take advantage of our alternative does not change the fact that what they're doing is not working. So the more resistance that we have to what we are proposing, which is, first of all, manifest in the manufacture of gold, the more resistance we have to that, the more irrational the behavior, the more proof we're having that we're on the right track. Because there's no reason for them to be stable, traditional, have all the power and years of pseudo successful repetition. But when you look at the results, I mean, just the two towers in New York, they came down September the 11th of 2001. Something was not working. And the one thing that I remember, because I was told that we were, able to defend ourselves and scramble our resources within a matter of minutes. We didn't see any scrambling for over half an hour. So I don't know what happened. I don't want to discuss that on this channel. All I'm trying to say is it didn't work. Whatever we thought was working didn't work. So maybe that was intended not to work. And if that is the case, then all the things that we're doing to prevent things from working, that is working. So now everybody's becoming aware that it's not working and things are not changing for the better. So you can't go by the words. You have to go by the intention. And interestingly enough, that's how the universal community works. That's how love works. And you can practice that with your partner. And, except unless you're in Georgia, And you know the Georgia peaches, how much do I love you? I love you, Cadillac. But other than that, I love you a lot.
Now, you talk about things not working. How are the commandments working? Do you think with this technology, I mean, I don't think we fulfill them, especially the one thou shalt not kill or steal. That's part of our, but do you think with this technology we will in the future be able to fulfill the commandments? I know they were given for the physicality or the soul of physicality to reach the level of the soul of the man, but it seems they haven't worked out so well. Even in our own personal lives, I'm just not talking about war, but we understand killing and releasing of souls and stealing other entities to maintain our own energy. So, with this technology, will we get closer to fulfilling these commandments, or will that not be part of the equation anymore?
The initial resistance that humanity has is to rebel against the commandments, isn't it? Mom told you not to do something, and you say, yes, mom. And then as soon as mom goes around the corner and out of sight, you do whatever you want. And you suffer the consequences. And then you come back and mom says, I told you not to do that. And you stupid, you went and did that. Well, mom, I just, I thought I knew more than you. And well, that's, why mom was the teacher and you were the student. But if you refuse to listen, so that leads to consequences. Um, if we continue in that vein, then we deserve what we get. So
Okay.
we have to make a decision.
Yeah, I think the technology, especially in the feeding department, will help us quite a bit in this moving away from killing and destroying other things. And of course, that changes the behavior, which is part of the enlightenment and elevation. So I would say these technologies will help us to fulfill more of the commandments, let's say.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is I don't need the commandments.
Okay.
Okay, there's no 10 commandments for tomatoes. Okay, or hamsters.
Well, because the plants have more soul than the man does. That's why
No,
they
they
don't
don't.
need it. Yeah, they
No, they
do.
don't.
Okay.
No, the plants aren't more equal than we are.
Okay.
They just don't need it. Someone has arbitrarily decided that we need commandments. It'd be like me here, telling you, well, this is the way the plasma science is, and that's it. You're going to like it or you're going to lump it. You know, I'm navigating through this just like everybody on this panel is. But the fact of the matter is, there's a consistency. Okay, so we know that let simple question, simple question. In North America, it's a growing season. Okay, so we know, and we jokingly say, oh, he has a green thumb, or they have a black thumb, meaning one can communicate with the plants and get them to flourish, and the other one, well, they're just a plant killer. Okay, and why is that? How does that happen? So obviously, someone has a different understanding, and they have this different type of communication. So there is no right way and a wrong way. What we have to understand is that life is for learning, and when you make a mistake and let's say in this case, you you know ruin the life of a plant. And I'm not talking about just eating it. I'm just talking about, it just withers and dies in your presence. It doesn't want to grow for you. Then whatever you're doing is not working. And to say you have a black thumb, well, that's cruel. Okay. Yeah, you just don't know. That's all. Or you're not applying what you really do know. So you have to change to that. And the person who does know, well, they may be successful, but that doesn't mean that they know how. They're just working, uh, naturally with what they see is right. But I can tell you that I always thought that it was very important to, give water to the plant. But with the plasma science, we spray the leaves of the plant and we draw the plant out. Well, that's a novel concept. I've never heard anyone say that before. Or how do we water all the hundreds of acres in China? You need a big hose. You need a big sprinkler system. I see the farms, they have these huge vehicles that carry the hose, and they just roll over the ground and they put a spray. How do golf courses do it? They bury the water lines in the ground, and then they have a nozzle that sprays a fountain. But how do you do that for hundreds of acres? And then we find that someone says, oh, we created a plasma field and we took that plasma and converted it into the nourishing water and we fed it directly to the plant. No hose, no tub, no one there going with a plunger to, throw water in there. Because here's the problem. You don't know enough. How do you know when the plant needs water? And what happens if the plant needs water and you're not around? So now what the plant is doing is just kind of sitting there and saying, "Oh, Mark forgot to give me water."
Sorry, I just muted one person.
Yeah, so Mark forgot to give me water, and he said, "Oh, I forgot to water the plant. I better go and water the plant." And the plant say, "Yeah, okay, well, we'll try this again." But I really lost a lot of momentum in the meantime. So this is the whole point. So if there is a communication on a plasmatic level with the plant and the needs of the plant, and if we exclude the potential limiter or the weak link, we find that we're the weak link because we're so physical, we're so in matter state. Okay, so I'll give the water to the plant when I want to. When I'm good and ready, I'll give it to you. And right now I want to go bowling. Okay, so you're just going to have to wait. And we suffer the consequences as a result. So what's the difference? Well, the difference is where a farmer is barely able to manage in poverty, or a farmer is able to expand into profitability, not only feed his family, but improve the quality of the life. And if he does that for himself, then he can do it for his neighbor and everybody else. So there's the answer. Back to you, Mark.
Okay, Carolyn, did you want to say something, or did the mic just come open? I muted it for you. But yes, I think we'll see if they can create the gold again out of the fields. What can we do with again helping the farmers and creating the nutrients that the plants need without even again putting any sort of chemical inputs on the land. So as he said, with this technology, the farmer will increase his yield 2 or 3 times, and this will be the difference in getting out of poverty. I think people will still be eating for a little while longer, or if you desire to eat, so we'll have some very beautiful plants to consume if that's the way you want to go, or again, learning to receive the energy from those plants with just by enjoying their beauty and not actually chewing them. This was what will happen in the future, I think. And of course, the feeding app is one of the primary ways to get us to change and move away from the killing practice as we understand it in the Keshe Foundation. I'm not talking about war between men. I'm talking about war between vertical, horizontal people that we seem to be quite enamored with. As you said, food is the main gathering point of meetings and discussions and family things. I think Irma's having one of those today. But we haven't realized, so we really can't blame anyone. I've never come to this realization and even battled with it a little bit within the Keshe Foundation of, again, sorting it out within myself and my own understanding.
Well, the fact of the matter is that we came here to try and sort it out. And we knew that coming in. And so, we can't, just pontificate and say, okay, well, we got to completely stop eating, and there has to be a way to transition. And you made a comment earlier on as to a reference to Mr. Keshe saying, well, there's only a select few, and these select few have the constitutional integrity and intensity to be able to transmute or connect with the universe on their own. But the rest of us, we have, through the conditioning of the environment, we have forgotten these skills. So most of us didn't even know we had them, so we never cultivated them.
Absolutely.
But that's what we have to do right now.
Yep.
But fundamentally, a paradigm shift is going to take place. And so we are at the crossroads where we can take a few years, we could take 10 years, or we could take 1,000 years. So
Right.
why do we have to wait? And so I'm personally of the opinion, well, since we're in the post-May the 10th, 2025 era, we don't have to wait any longer. We've lost our opportunity to make excuses. We have to come up with a whole new bunch of excuses. And for those of us who know that this is now possible, we have to look at how this affects us on a practical basis. How it affected me when I learned about this advanced science, and I'm not saying this particular advanced science, but just advanced science. I thought that our technological advancements were advanced science. No, once it gets down to the practical application of consumerism and stuff like that, that's conventional science. The advanced science is always on the leading edge, of the technological advancements. Once I got into that, then I started to realize that I didn't have enough knowledge, and that there was a whole vista of another world out there for me. So then I had to compare what would that mean in to me personally. So what we ascertained at that time, and I'm talking about 34 years ago, was that there are essentials, and those in order are air, water, food, and shelter. And so those are the things that you need to address within 24 hours. If you address those in 24 hours, then you can start to address other things. Until you do those things, forget about the other things. So if you are looking at an industry, those industries need to comply with those essentials. So if you're looking at an activity, how does it compare to those essentials? Because that's what we're faced with right now. Because if you lose your job, you could lose your home. You may not be able to provide food for your family, and you may not be able to get fuel for your car. You may even lose your car. Have you ever had your car repossessed? It's degrading. Okay, but so what happens now? How do you adjust? And how quickly do you recover? And many never recover. So this is the dilemma we are all facing. So it isn't just a matter of, the banks trying to exercise more control to confiscate your money. Why are the banks pursuing that? Because it's a radical effort, because it's indicative of a paradigm shift that is coming. And what they're doing is for their own self-preservation. So they have already made preparations for that. And so one of the ways that they can preserve themselves is at our expense. So what are we going to do? Are we going to turn around and steal from someone else at their expense? Somewhere along the way, someone's going to get a short end of the stick, and they're going to fall through the cracks, if you will, and be relegated to, being homeless and, living on the street and trying to navigate through that social dysfunction. So the fact that today maybe someone is wealthy, tomorrow they could be wiped out in terms of finances. So the fact of the matter is that the finances do not make the man. The man makes the finances. So the family is based on the people involved and has nothing to do with anything else. So that is true because we've all seen where maybe an immigrant has come into your community, and because if they work together, they all contribute to the benefit of their family, and you find that they prosper, and you say, wow, in a short order, they are prospering and they have more than I have, and I've been here for decades. So why is that? That is the difference between the personality of the Canadians and the Americans and the Brazilians. We have 100 to 200 people on our Telegram channel, and Brazil has over 10,000. Why is that? It's a difference in the culture. So it just shows you that when all the oars are in the water going the same way, that we can prosper. Well, we cannot prosper if there's disunity and if there's war, because the whole nature of the war is those who supply the weapons prosper, and those who use the weapons, well, they suffer. I mean, that's just a rule. And every war has been like that. That's one of the benefits of history. You get a chance to look at that. But now we have a transgenerational view of history, because that emotion, that energy is ported from our ancestry. It's inherent in our RNA, and that RNA is our foundation. It's our foundational blueprint. So it's not something that you can grab onto. It's just something that you have to work with. And you don't need to be a scientist to do that. All you need to have is care and compassion for humanity, and understand that we are a product of what we give our time and attention to. Thank you very much, Mark, and thanks everybody for allowing me to continue to present. I hope you enjoyed today's session, and we look forward to other new exciting things. I'll pass it back to you, Mark.
Thank you. And of course, this is going to create a lot of balance within the nations, as people don't have to worry so much about food, or they don't have to think about where is my energy coming from, or will it be always there. This is going to create a lot of balance and a lot of peace. And this is just the beginning of the opening of the technology. I think the space travel and the rest of this will become quite, many people want to hear the stories of your interactions with other lives in the universe, because most people have not even considered that there are more lives in the universe. We're so self-centered here, but this is opening up. So thank you, Alex, and thank you, everyone. Is there any other thoughts, questions, comments, issues you'd like to address at this point, or questions? If not, we can end this session. I'd like to play the clip from the workshop from the Keshe Foundation store, the Energizer and Alkalizer container, which Alex, I guess he sort of made his own, which we all can do. But this is a product from the Keshe Foundation store. Increasing the pH usually increases the health of the entity, as I understand it, at least on this planet. And then, of course, the dynamic reactors with the fan and so on and so forth. And this is what the box says: we start to believe in something we can't see, plasma wind. And this is that whole energy dimension. It's hard to hold that in your hand and show someone else, but you can certainly experience it, and they can too. So I'm going to play that clip, the final disclaimer, and the meeting, the session will come to an end. Any other thoughts, comments, questions, issues? And of course, I'm sure all the groups are going to increase as the technology becomes more and more available. But I think that's why, since it hasn't been picked up by the international press, Mr. Keshe is going to go around and actually demonstrate to the nationals in different locations. And this should create another groundswell of activity, let's say, or inquisitiveness about this technology and what it can do, as we'll hear more and more testimonials about it as well. So if you're looking for advanced space technology, you'll find it in the Keshe Foundation store. Please consider attending one of these conferences when they come to your area, or you can travel again to other places and enjoy it just the same. So we thank you all for being here, being part of it. We're part of a much bigger process. I don't think we certainly haven't comprehended the depth of the technology, but we certainly also haven't contemplated the ramifications thoroughly of what this technology is going to do in the elevation of this planet, as I see it.
Which reminds me of a funny story. Can I?
Please tell.
When I was early 20s, I was doing some casual firefighting. I was on my holidays, and
Sure.
we had a fire that was out of control, so they dragged us. Well, they didn't drag us. We volunteered to join, and as a city boy, this was a shocking experience. So we were coming back from the fire. We were walking along the tracks, and there was a curve that was going through a rock cut, and we could hear the train whistle. And my friends were up ahead, and they turned around and said, "Oh, Alex's train's coming." And I said, "Yeah." I was kind of tired, and I thought, "Oh, well, it sounds like it's far away." But of course, the rock cut had muffled the sound. So it wasn't only a few seconds later, and the train came through the rock cut, and it was going at 50 miles an hour. That's 80 kilometers. And you're standing on the train track looking at the train coming barreling at you like that, and of course it's massive. So I took one look at that train, and I ran to the rock cut, and I swear to God, I made a high jump world record. I was up, I couldn't believe how high I had climbed, and it was just one or two steps, and I was up the wall. and I was above the train. I was clinging to the rocks as the train flew by, and it was scary. So I think this is the situation. We know the train is coming, but we really can't see it. So we're just kind of, you know, lackadaisical about it.
A faint whistle?
Yeah, it's just oh yeah, I hear it. Yeah, yeah. But when it comes into that rock cut and you're, as they say, between a rock and a hard place, we're gonna have to move very quickly. So everyone's been warned, including all the people on this panel, and I'm sure we have tried to inform our friends and everybody. And one of the
Sure.
things that I'm noticing is that there is a gradual softening of the resistance because everyone is kind of feeling that something in the air, that something's not right, something is happening. Maybe they don't understand it, but they recognize that there's a pink elephant in the room. And when that elephant manifests itself, it is going to be a real shock. And I think at that point in time, it'll be very easy because we all have this feeling that things are about to change.
We'll be there when they faint to catch them and to elevate
I
them.
think we're going to be part of the fainting process too, because I'm sure a lot of the knowledge seekers are also, pinching themselves and saying, well, we've waited an awfully long time. Well, yeah, like it's thousands of years we've been waiting.
Well,
So,
2025 is the year. 2025 is the year for the technology to be introduced. It has been introduced, and now it's going to continue to expand.
well, you can't deny the fact that we produce gold, and we've shown that on YouTube. You can't deny that. So,
Yeah.
it's there, and we have thousands of Chinese. I think we have what 75 million followers on the Chinese network. So, you know, uh,
Is that right? I've never known that.
the, uh, the Chinese community is the most knowledgeable when it comes to the cache technology. It's massive.
Beautiful. Okay, one last call. Is there anyone who wanted to say something or is biting their tongue and thinking whether they should open their mic or not? Please feel free to do so. If not, I want to thank you all for being here. Thank you, Alex, for continuing to shed enlightenment in a way on more understanding. As we understand, it's going to take more than all of us on this planet to really open up the technology. And I think it was evident, as Mr. Kesh has repeated in the last workshop, where he said this will take thousands of years for man to understand, but they're laying down the groundwork. Some of us may pick it up. I think we don't have to wait for thousands of years to understand it, but we'll see how man going forward accepts this technology and continue to elevate the world leaders and religious leaders, and of course the physicists, the other scientists as well, that they can start to become enlightened and change the position of the way they're imprisoning or killing the nationals in so many ways. And it's just not outright killing them. There's many methods, as we know, to shorten the life expectancy of the population, which seems to be the agenda this day. But of course, we have solutions, and we're going to actually create more people on this planet rather than less. As he said, peace creates much, much more wealth across the board and power too. So we're moving in this direction. As Alex said, I think the people are having a sense, or the plasma wind is blowing here on this planet as it is through the universe, as he talks about the new tomorrow where things are going to be set in positions galaxies will move, stars will change position, that every one of us will be able to transit between the two dimensions of energy and matter state. So thank you all. I will play the clip from the workshop first of the store. Again, Keshe Foundation store. We put all these in the chat. We've put in the playlist of the older YouTube channel. We've put in the World Peace Treaty, contacting the doctors of the Keshe Foundation by writing to the Wellness Center office at de.kfwellness.center. We've also included the new Space channel on YouTube, as well as the store, and as well as Mr. Keshe's presence on the X platform, which you can sign up, follow. And there may be some things coming forward on the X as well. I think they call it Spaces or something, where Mr. Keshe said they'll be doing something on the X channel, probably some other live presentations, I'm not sure. But it's all coming together. Again, this is well planned out. The professor is well seasoned, and the team is becoming very well seasoned to understand and to start replicating some of these systems. And this gives the capability to all of us to understand more and to use the systems to achieve what we desire to achieve. So thank you all again. Have an amazing rest of your day. We'll bring up the workshop, and the final disclaimer, and the meeting will come to an end. Any other thoughts, comments, questions, issues? Okay, let me share the screen. Let's bring this up. And thank you all again. And we'll see you in one of the future sessions. Thank you all.
Water is the foundation of our life. It is part of every living creature. Pure water gives you the energy of nature. Now you can have this energy in your home. The Keshe Foundation Alkalizer and Energizer is designed for your daily well-being. It increases the pH of the water so your body can absorb more oxygen and stay in its natural condition during the day. Keshe Foundation Alkalizer and Energizer. Be pure like the water.
Disclaimer: the information and education material contained herein is meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of GANs processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.